Thank you, Your Honours. I think very quickly on the point that was raised by, or rather in relation to the election registration of electors registration, and Your Honour Dato Azad made an observation in relation to one of the provisions, which was the correction and so on. But if you look also at, but there is yet another provision, I think, which, and I take the point that these provisions, these regulations can be very all-pervasive and really undermine the whole spirit. And if Your Honour looks at page 189, and this is the registration of electors regulations, I think if we look at regulation 25, it's very far-reaching, because the chief registrar may at any time, if we look at sub 2, may at any time make such alterations or changes to the principal electoral roll or the supplementary electoral roll. And now we come to this rather serious position that has occurred and is beginning to proliferate in this country, and this is candidate intimidation and obstruction. We had the evidence of Puan Nurul Izzah, who said, and she's been plagued by this, she says, of her campaign office, her supporters being intimidated, being threatened physically. And of course the culmination came in the very sad case of Vasantha Kumar and Rajama. And we saw what happened in that kind of a situation. And you find, just go back one slide, and that's the SPR officer, the election officer, standing by normal parties which have been participating in the process for a long time, together with a kind of a breakaway from the old UMNO. There's some reconstituted. All right? So we are talking about an attempt to establish a two-party system, which is being met with these kind of horrific manipulations of voters. So my whole summation of manipulation of voters has to be read in that context, that there is being there is being pumped into the whole system all kinds of manipulative maneuvers to prevent, or as some people will say, to steal the election, as it were. So I think Rajama's case is really needs no explanation. The mother came, and you know, I was loath to put her in the box because she obviously was quite emotional about her loss, but she wanted to assuage her hurt and feelings where there had been, her son was murdered in relation to the election, in relation to him supporting an alternative candidate, and nothing has been done of the ruling DMK party. The very fact that terrorism has been let loose at every polling booth, according to the petitioner, the same is indicated that the polling process was not at all done in accordance with law. It was not a free and fair election. So the point is that EC cannot have a hands-off approach. That is the point. That it is given a constitutional mandate, not by some federal act of parliament, a constitutional mandate that came from the Reid Commission in 1957. And therefore it has a sacred task, and it has to be held responsible in terms of that task. And so we can say, in a sense, I'm glad to say, because they say they are listening to all that we are saying, so I don't know which direction I should face for the lives, that in the face of such a huge litany of cases, how can it be suggested that they are ignorant, that they do not know how to respond? It's not their duty to respond. That is the point we are making. So I will not go into this, but we had Yasmin who came, that was SD, and she adopted the SD of Wong Kar Fai, which is SD 36, which sets out in chapter and verse what they observed, what Permantau observed, and the number of complaints that were lodged. This is a huge amount. And this was supplemented by the evidence of, was it Akmal? And we had a whole list from my page 13, it goes on to 14 and it goes on to from my page 15 at the bottom to 16 to 17, a whole list of people who came forth to talk about the problems that had arisen. All right? We had indigenous people coming and telling us what is going on a routine basis during the campaign period, all the time, and under the influence of the candidate, in the presence of the candidate, in the presence of the Menteri Besar of Pahang, for example, Adnan, in the presence of the candidate Rosidi, who is the state minister in charge of looking after indigenous people. Now this is the kind of breach. Not so long ago, if I can say something, went to this Kampong Kiding, it's called. I have to walk up, almost died doing it, but I had to walk up a very steep slope. Took me 3.5 hours to go and visit indigenous people with regard to a project we were doing in the university. And the students have to, the school pupils from primary age have to travel up and down that, right? To go to school every day with backpacks. It takes them much faster, 1.5 hours they told me. So I took about 4 hours, but I told them 3.5. All right? So now this is the kind of situation where it means very significant things for ordinary people, ordinary voters, upon which governments are being elected. So, and she deals with, SOHACAM is a statutory body to deal with human rights. And so no one can put her evidence, no one can suggest her evidence is anything but for the advancement of indigenous people, because she actually participated in SOHACAM in an inquiry on titles for indigenous people. So she knows what she's talking about. And she gave evidence. People were actually given titles, unsigned copies of titles. Now this is the extent to which the proportions that taken very clearly, vouchers given. This is in the longhouse that is given. He's being explained, being checked. They're quite careful also who they give the money to. They make sure that you have voted. So there is a bit of auditing that they do in terms of the bribery. And then we had Dato' Halim and all this, where there's also an article by Aliran inside there, by Anil Neto, which was in the document itself. And we read that, very clear. It was not just the candidate who was Dato' Halim, or his aide, but also the article by Anil Neto, where they themselves witnessed vouchers being cashed very openly. No sense of shame. No sense that election officers will come. Very confident that election officers will stand idly by while all these transfers. This is in bundle 4 at tab 6, and it says buying support, Najib's commercialization of GE13. Yes, it appears at my page 30, which I can mention now, page 30. And you see, after the Prime Minister, present Prime Minister and past Prime Minister, he came into office, it was anybody's guess when he would hold the election. The complete discretion is vested in him. That is why there is a need to fix dates instead of this. And the amount of money, it's calculated, comes to development targeted. So these are pledges, of course. Government, we heard Terence, Professor Terence say that, you know, if it is your policy, therefore, of course, you must implement your policy. This is at bundle 4, tag 6. Of course, you must implement policies. I mean, all governments must implement policies. The money is calculated. All right, and how it is calculated is set out by Bridget Welsh. And she gives a primer, election primer. We have a little box overleaf, development targeted pledges 46.7 billion, and One Malaysia program 11.0 billion. So estimated total 57.7 billion. So what are we talking about? having a law which says don't spend more than 100,000 and you don't spend more than 200, that's a joke. It's a joke on the people who are serious in participating in the process. That is the point that we are making. All right? So this is the kind of undue influence that we are talking about. The bribery of various kinds, which is eroding, in fact, the whole ethos of a society, as in Malaysia, which has developed all this while on values that are fundamental and that we share universally with the rest of the world, of honesty, of fairness, and so on. So this is being undermined. So this is a fundamental. We heard about the role of advanced voting, and we heard from the Merdeka Center, who were the accredited observers with the EC. EC accredited them, and they said advanced voting made all the difference. They set out, we have here at our page, at bundle 2, impact of early and postal votes, 343344. Impact of only 23 seats needed to change hands. And it would have meant the Pakatan would have got 112 and BN would have got 110. So 2 narrow seats, but that's all it needed, 23, never mind about 30. So advanced voting becomes important, and so we look at advanced voting rules. Advanced voting rules has only got 3, at page 146, only 3 provisions on advanced voting. Advanced voting, 27A says persons who can qualify, and then says safe custody of ballot box and counting of votes. 3 provisions. Now how can you have that? If for postal voters, you've got a whole regulation in relation to that, to cover the security of postal voting. For normal voting, we got acts and regulations, and slipped in somewhere. Proof that it be in the police lockup. Police lockup, on the face of it, sounds safe. I don't know how safe, but never mind. But at least notionally, all right? And probably this is the arrangement. But first, why 5 days? I think it was witness P.Y. Wong who queried this. Why do you need 5 days to keep these votes when it raises a clear security problem? Right? Secondly, even this question of safe custody has been challenged by so many witnesses. A sitting member of parliament who was also contesting in return, Puan Fuzia, gave evidence. She heard about some improprieties. You know, in this country, a lot of things get passed on from word to mouth, and a lot of people know things that otherwise are supposed to be suppressed. But she knew about this, and so she went to the police station. She was told you can't. She was chased away at gunpoint. We heard evidence of that. Now what is this? You can't have this. Is this safe custody? And the SPR officers, I don't blame them because there are a whole range of them, right? There are problems with SPR officers. But the Election Commission has to come in and do something. They issue guidelines. There's no parliamentary. And at page 74, the bundle page 74, not the case page 74, this is what Justice Wanyaya had to say. He said, to a great extent, I read from the left-hand column on the left-hand side. To a great extent, the examinations of these 2 witnesses were devoted to the subtle suggestions as to what the presiding officer did or did not do with the ballot boxes and what he could have done to the contents while the boxes were out of public view. So he's giving some credit to this subtle examination that we did. I think an equally, if not more important issue to consider is what any reasonable member of the public would hypothesize about ballot boxes being taken on a discursive or roundabout journey out of the view of the public and polling agents' eyes by a presiding officer who had the custody of both the ballot boxes and the sealing device and so on and so forth. So that's the point. The perception is as important as the reality because we are talking about the integrity of an electoral process. This is important, the perception. And this is how it should be dealt with, the elections. So, you see, this is critical. Now, there is grave disquiet in this country about the role of advance voting, such that it even prompted an accredited observer to make those conclusions. So justice must not be not seen to be done and not paid to be done. That is very important. Now we also want to bring to your kind attention, Your Honours, if Bundle 2, page 345, which is a paper recently written, Bundle 2, page 345, Statistical Anomalies in Malaysia's GE13 Results, a preliminary review. This is a first cut, they call it, first cut of the crunching of the numbers. And it reveals something quite interesting. I'm not going to labor that whole point, but it will show that there was, if you could kindly turn to page 349, there was excess voter turnout. There was excess voter turnout. In Baram, in the constituency of Baram, this is under 5, there is a large number of anomalies here cited. If I could invite kindly a look at page 355, preliminary observations. The preliminary look at the results has pointed to anomalies in over 40 parliamentary seats with varied effects on the electoral results. The overwhelming majority of anomalies in seats are those that have benefited the incumbent government, who only won power by 23 parliamentary seats. While more needs to be done to verify and review these findings, the problems of turnout, postal and early voting, so the early voting is also, advanced voting, and missing and spoiled ballots support initial concerns with the electoral conduct of the polls and the veracity of the final outcomes. This involves the integrity of the entire electoral process as a means of reflecting the results of the electorate. A matter for all Malaysians and those concerned with electoral integrity in Malaysia. The instances reported above are not isolated but occurred in multiple seats and areas, including East Malaysia. Of particular significance are 3 important areas not reported in earlier polls: excess voter turnout, early voting patterns, and clusters of missing ballots. It should also be noted that this analysis excludes only systemic concerns of completely messed up, right? And that is what determines the outcome. That form is not provided, right? We also showed Form 13, which showed how many ballot papers were received and how many were issued, right? And we had that problem too in Form 13. Form 13 is not mandatory to supply, but where we got those, we saw very clear transgressions. Then at my page 20, I talk about denying use of common logo. Now this is very interesting, because if you look at the report of, if you look at ideas, which is in your orange folder, and this is in tab 1, we will see one of the key points is about free and fair elections is you must allow parties to participate in a manner that is in accordance with their plans and programs and methods such as this. Now then we have, of course, we have the irregularities relating to the electoral. Earlier I talked about electoral roll in terms of the law. All right. Now we talk about manipulation of voter registration. And at my page 20, I've set out phantom voters, right? What is phantom? That means non-citizen voters. That's in my box. Impersonators of dead voters. Non-resident, non-constructive voters. This is how it is defined in the article by Ong Kian Min in the book one of the panel members, is a very useful book, edited by Dr. Mavis and Dr. Noorani. And then dubious voters. Summary is provided. We provided a summary of 30 issues that relate to this whole issue of the electoral roll being thoroughly defective. We had video of Mary Josephine. Mary Josephine is showing us voters registered in areas, right, in condominiums. This is the condominium, all right? Condominiums in the RCI inquiry. The Sabah National Registration Department, DG Dato' Jaria bin Muhammad Said, told the RCI there were 113,000 problematic IC holders in Sabah. And that's also reported. That's also in our bundle. But the most interesting thing is this. What is shown is these people, many of them identified, reappear in the 2013 roll. That is the point. We had the first witness, Charles Santiago, who gave clear evidence of this fact in his own constituency, because that's where he was, so he had an interest in that. And you had that situation. Right? So it is not like it is unknown. This is in the public domain, information in the public domain. So the Sabah EC knows, which means the overall EC who's listening, right, also should have known, but they reappear. Then you had the second category that Mr. Lee Wee Tak talked about was suspicious voters by address analysis. All right, this is almost 30% of the more than 13 million voters, approximately 4 million. Then we had last-minute addition and deletion of voters. The EC said we'll use electoral roll for G13 as certified and gazetted on 22nd. And I refer to that report at page 29 of the IDS report, item 5.9, under phantom voters. All right, while the overall election process proceeded with no major incidences, we observed verbal and physical confrontations against several individuals who resembled foreigners. This was because the public suspected that they were illegally voting as foreigners. There were reports that foreigners had been flown into Peninsular Malaysia just days before polling day. This created heightened awareness and may have contributed to the public acting as vigilantes. The concerns, this is what they say, these are accredited observers, the concerns of the public were justified, especially if this issue is examined in the context of the lack of trust in the integrity of the electoral roll. We believe this issue is directly related to problems associated with the electoral roll as discussed in section 4.4. However, we were not able to verify if the alleged foreigners were indeed foreigners or they were actually Malaysians who looked like foreigners. But the issue is there. The problem has been laid out, especially in the context of the RCI inquiry. And we had actually evidence, direct evidence, of Mr. Charles Santiago, who said he went into the bus, he spoke to them in Tamil language, right? So you take away the addresses. We saw how there were 600 people in one address, all right? And there was an explanation given by the EC. I'll come to the explanation as well. But the point is that you have this, then Mr. Lee Wee Tak told us, he showed us very clearly, if you did that, there would be a different government in Perak. It will be either 32-27 in favor of opposition or 30-29, one vote. But that's dangerous because the last time 2 of the people were jumped boat, so that's not so secure. But anyway, at the initial, the first cut, there will be a change of government in Perak and in Negeri Sembilan, 17-19. All right? Now, the EC says they have addressed these issues that were raised by Lee Wee Tak and others. But Mr. Lee Wee Tak made it very clear, all right, and we have it in Exhibit C1, Para 16 and 17, that they addressed only 2 of the 20 issues that were raised. And we can go through those issues that they raised in a short while. So we have these so many cases that we had. We had Inung Kiran binti Mongi Jal, a blind woman, right? She did not register, but she, amongst her blind friends, right, through Braille and so on, Lembah Pantai. So even if there's a mistake and they went back on an IC because they say IC is the source of all this, her IC shows Johor Jaya. And the election, when she was given the electoral roll also, it came to her Johor Jaya address, greetings from the ruling party, telling her about the fact that she's registered in Lembah Pantai. Now these are the kind of disquiet, loud, clear disquiet that is happening. So we also had Ang Chong Ang, Pe Po Yap, Lau Yek Hua, Akmal, and then of course we'll furnish an article by K.J. John who wrote in the Malaysia Kini and who's asked that his evidence be included in the record to say that the question is he is not resident in a particular place and he is registered as a resident and as a voter in an area which is alien to him, and he says that this should end. That should be, there was Mr. P.Y. Wong said it should be for convenience of voters, it should be where people reside and known to reside. All right, then we have P.Y. Wong's SD at page 82 and the response by Prime Minister's Department to say, no, this is just some minor error that is not prevalent throughout the whole problem. Okay, so we have, I have set out here on revising the roll, what is supposed to be done under the election rules. It's supposed to be must revise. The registrar must revise the principal electoral roll every 3 months of who have died or become disqualified under Rule 10. The importance of this is this. It is the obligation cast upon the Election Commission to revise the roll of those who are dead. It is no excuse to say, you know, you did not show us your death certificate, or you did not, the onus is on someone else, right? That happens, phantom voters, you know, they come alive. So the thing is that the onus is always pushed. We'll come to that when we talk about the role of the Election Commission, but the fact remains that there is a binding obligation, all right, under Rule 10 upon the Election Commission to revise the rule. The burden is on them and not upon any other government department or upon any other, or a voter or elector to do that. And it even provides, for example, just give me the, it even provides that they must go house to house on live stream or through live stream. We make this resounding call to the EC to comply. Now, then we have manipulation of voting. So manipulation of voting at 23, we are dealing now with the voting process, is stuffing the ballot box with false votes or votes of dead souls, personation, which is an offense under the Offences Act, Election of Offences Act, and then we come to multiple voting. See, multiple voting was a demand made by civil society to prevent double voting. And we had then the issues relating to indelible ink. We heard all the stories relating to indelible ink. There we have easily removed 24%, inconsistent application 11%, voters told to use ink to mark ballots 2%. So this was the most indelible of indelible inks in the history of indelible ink. Meaning that we had a situation, I mean, this is, I have stated it in a rather frivolous manner, but it contains in its essence a very important point, which is something that is protected and which I referred to at the beginning under the UN Human Elections Standards as preventing double voting, and this is the protection. And we had, of course, Your Honor, Professor Ramlan, who said, it's done in Indonesia, what's the problem? That is because they were accredited observers, so no one can question their standing with regard to the elections. All right, at page 28.5.8. And so we had problem first, by the afternoon of the advanced voting, this is on the top of the page on the right-hand column, we received reports, they received reports that the ink could actually be washed off. In most cases, the ink only faded away. We received similar complaints on normal voting day. Again, in most cases, the ink had actually faded. And then one person who demonstrated his finger had completely been, not his finger, I mean the ink from his finger had been completely removed through normal hand washing with no traces of the ink. There were at least 100 police reports that this observer group noted. All right. Second, the ink did not dry as quickly as the EC said it would. The EC claimed that the ink would take only a few seconds and so on. All right. We observed that the indelible ink issue resulted in further criticism against the EC. We also observed the EC's response to this matter on polling day and found it to be dismissive. They said no. The EC chief came on, and this is noted here. The chairperson of the EC appeared on double voting. Why suddenly in one case there's silver nitrate? Yes. And then we had the interesting evidence of that young boy who came here, Muhammad Fadli bin Kaharuddin, if you will recall. And he said he tested the system. All right? He's quite smart guy because, it is an offense. But he didn't take it out of the polling station. The law says only polling stations. So these young boys nowadays know how to deal with this kind of situation. So he said he cast his vote at 10 a.m., washed it off, came back, and he was allowed to vote again. So what is this deputy chairperson of EC saying, don't worry, that the system is foolproof? It's not. This is proved foolproof. And he lodged a police report immediately thereafter to show his bona fides in the fact that he was testing the system and not that he was out to bust the system. Because immediately he surrendered the ballot. He went and saw the policeman outside. They took him to a police station. They brought him back, right? And then the SPR officer, he had some discussions with the SPR officer. And until today, there's a deafening silence. There is no answer to this very obvious proof of the fact that there was an ability to double vote entered on the ballot papers. And I informed this to the EC officer who was outside the building, and they were just talking among themselves and then did not give any clear answer. I came directly to police station to make this report immediately, all right, on 5th May itself, 10:13 a.m., shortly after the time that he voted. Now, let me just explain this because it's not so clear, and this is what happened. The ballot paper, because there people were contesting, and this is a kind of a rural community, there were large number of rubber estates, and these rubber estates have been taken over. A lot of the people have been relocated to housing, very modest housing in and around that little township. It's a very small township. And so people go by symbols. Symbols are very important. So the party that was contesting was the BN, which is the scale, and the PKR, which is a moon and so on, a very distinct blue moon with red revolutionary lines at the side, right? From the previous party. Okay, so now the thing is, when they went to vote, they didn't find a symbol of PKR. The only people contesting is PKR and BN. But you had different signs. There was no symbol of the party they wanted to vote for. So they completely confused because they don't know who to vote for. Had not been brought in. It was already 11 o'clock. 10 minutes away, counting would have finished. These boxes were not coming in. And they were protesting and they were getting agitated and so on. And of course, some fracas came and the police came. SPR officers stood by and they were excluded from that whole process of counting. None of their party supporters were there. And they were called in after that by SPR officers, who could have done the same much earlier, and then brought in to hear the results that they had lost. And this is the same situation. This is the same Vasanta Kumar whose bodyguard was murdered. Then we have tabulation, all right? And again, failure to tabulate or failure to give the requisite forms, falsification of voting results, and there we have the evidence of Dr. Haji Zulkifli that I talked about, where the Form 14 was so erroneous, it showed missing votes in ballot boxes for 17 out of the 39 streams. And this is where he lost 17 out of the 39 streams. He lost by a slim majority. All right, now we come to one of the final areas. Is it the final? Yeah. Final areas, we deal with the Election Commission. All right, and at page 25 I have set out electoral governance through election commission when there is a need for this whole infrastructure governing an electoral body is around the time of elections being held, because that's when it's most active, or some period before that and after that. In our country, this has got statutory stature, that there is complete protection. So the jury in law, there's complete protection. You cannot remove except on the same basis as you remove a judge, although we note that a large number of judges have been removed in this country, but that's another question, no? For another people's tribunal. But the thing is that you have, therefore, you have them full time. That is why they said, in response to our request that they attend, they said, no, we are watching it full time. And it's probably overtime, because now it's beyond time, isn't it? 5 o'clock. All right? So they are working full time. So there is no excuse, I mean it in all seriousness, for there to be no real professionalism introduced in the process of the election itself, the counting and so on and so forth. Right? Now, so this is an obligation that is there, that the public has entrusted them with. They draw huge salaries, right? They draw huge allowances, enjoys public confidence. So it must be not only at the time of appointment that you enjoy public confidence, but throughout. This is a constitutional mandate. When they lose public confidence, they lose the basis upon which their appointment rests in the Constitution. That is key. Not that we are asking for resignations or anything, but we are saying that the duty is really onerous, and that has to be fulfilled. That is very high level of responsibilities and duties, privileges and duties as well. All right? So this implies, I've quoted Harding, renowned observer of our constitutional, Malaysian constitution. This implies that there must be no appointment with persons with political connections. And that means past, present, future. Not, I can't remember whether I was not. That's important. I mean, this is important. The election commissioners said that they are not clear because I may have been a member of a branch and so on. So that is, the point is, it's not that people are disqualifying you, but you have to declare very clearly, and then the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has to decide, all right? So after they had the fight, then his term ended, so they couldn't remove him. Then the replacement was of EC comprised, within quotes, persons closely associated with the MCA and the MIC and the ruling alliance in Sarawak. These appointments, two of which were opposed by EC members themselves, all right, also reflect the practice evolved during this period of making appointments from nominations by the main component parties of the ruling coalition. And this is, this article appears in the book, Elections and Democracy in Malaysia, edited by Dr. Putucherry and Dr. Naraini. Now, the thing is, there is an attempt to say, but there are provisions in the Election Commissions Act, which I can very quickly refer to, at sections 9 and 10 of the Election Commission Act. It says, unauthorized publication and disclosure, no member of the, no member of the Election Commission or any other person shall, without the written permission of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, publish or disclose to any, they says, unless the Yang di-Pertuan Agong shall in writing consent to such production or disclosure. So you say, oh, it's okay, they can get the consent of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. But on whose advice? How does the Yang di-Pertuan Agong exercise power? On whose advice? And what we need to do is look at Article 40, bracket 1 of the Federal Constitution, which deals with this question quite directly. It says, in the exercise of his functions under this Constitution or federal law, and that section that I talked about, section 5, is federal law because Election Commissions Act. So in the exercise of his functions under federal law, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong shall act in accordance with the advice of the cabinet or of a minister acting under the authority of the cabinet. So you say on the advice of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong therefore means that it's the advice of the cabinet because of Article 40, bracket 1 of the Federal Constitution. So you're back to the fact that unless he is authorized, so that's a protection, unless authorized, the consent is given. So you're not allowed to give the consent unless you now say, after saying you cannot give the consent by law, that you can give the consent. It doesn't make sense. And this is what has been said at page 98. I'll just read it because it'll probably, but just to note the fact that it is in the Statutory Declaration 70, page 98. Election Commission Chairman Tan Sri Abdul Aziz Yusof and his deputy, Dato' Wan Ahmad Wan Omar's membership in UMNO should not be an issue as they hold strongly to the working ethics of civil servants. Selangor UMNO Liaison Committee Chairman, Dato' Sri Noor Omar, said even though the chairman and deputy were members of UMNO, he was confident of their loyalty to their duties as senior government officers who had served a long time and had managed several general elections before this. It is because of that they've been promoted to the most senior positions for their loyalty and sacrifice as civil servants. Had they been loyal only to UMNO, they would have been made ministers now rather than being mere civil servants. That is a mistake. All right, and then, and so on and so forth. We have it, all right, the whole, sorry tale of this kind of situations amply set out in this statutory declaration. And, it's very interesting. Page 467, the second last paragraph from the bottom, just a short quote. In the Malaysian context, retired senior civil servants are unlikely to be completely neutral or indifferent as to which political party governs the country. A common observation by scholars of Malaysian government is a shared social background and political values among Malay political and administrative elites. This similarity in background and political values remains significant, especially at the federal level. So it's a socialization, shared social background, political belief that they have contributed to the country. But we don't have to take the views of this person, this author. If you look at the last paragraph on the same page, they conducted an interview, and this is what they have to say. The present EC chairman does not appear to be an exception. In a book written while he was the EC secretary, the chairman asked, what are the advantages of the electoral system practiced in Malaysia? His answer, the government will be more stable. This is the answer of the Election Commission. The government will be more stable if the party in power commands more than 2/3 majority in the assembly, and this situation may be achieved under the simple electoral system. So here, clear partisan views by A. Rashid, 1994-3, is a document marked and so on, as has been done in the UK, in Australia, in India, and a whole host of other countries. So on the legal grounds as to whether or not this can be done, I have set it out and have referred to the Supreme Court of India case, Mohinder Singh Gill against the Chief Election Officer, to say that they can exercise plenary power and with it necessary powers to discharge the function of conduct of elections. And plenary power means, the word plenary is defined as full, complete, entire, absolute, unqualified. So they have complete power to enact this. All right? So in the exercise of these powers, if you look at page 28 right at the bottom, this is where ministers and the government are banned use of official vehicles, no announcements of financial grants in any form or promises, including that of construction of roads, provision of drinking water facilities. They are banned from laying foundation stones of projects, and so on and so forth. All right?
But, just a question. Given all the kind of regulations, guidelines they have in, set out, do you really think that they should have all these powers?
Well,
you can first start by having an impartial and independent.
That's right. So
commission
the
there.
whole a case which actually talks about the fact that a caretaker government is established on dissolution of parliament. The case is Abdul Ghani, page 29, Abdul Ghani bin Ali. I've cited the pages 588, 599, and I provided the pages in the bundle itself. All right? So there is very clearly provision, there is very clearly a caretaker government. So there must be rules in relation to caretaker government in the conduct of elections, because caretaker government is when parliament is dissolved. Government does not exist anymore, except that this government continues to take care, that's why it's called caretaker, all right, to take care of the normal day-to-day running of government. But it cannot extend beyond that. And you'll find in the rules, all of the rules, code of conduct, they cannot go beyond that. They cannot make promises, and so on and so forth. And you will see in, and so you have all these rules, and I've set it out. In my page 30, we have Parliamentary Select Committee report, bundle 3477. We don't look at it. Australian government guidance on caretaker convention. So we got all the rules that we hope that your honors will take on board in relation to the establishment of a caretaker government. All right, what they can and what they cannot do. Now the Merdeka report very clearly article about 57.7 billion buying support Najib's commercialization. All right? Now, why so? Why should there be all these strictures on caretaker governments? I have set out 5, 6 reasons. Accountability to an elected legislature is no longer exists, because there is no longer any elected legislature to which you can be accounted for. So this is just running on the loose. One arm of the government, without any control, running wild, running loose, committing public funds. This is the point. This violates basic principles of constitutional democracy. Then it violates, as I say, doctrine of separation of powers, because executive is overriding legislative function. They are making all the decisions. Then no mandate from the people. Okay, maybe they can say, oh, I got mandate from the people, but there's no mandate from the people because parliament is dissolved. People are going to decide on a new government. So where is your mandate coming from? All right? So, and then it's open to abuse, of course. And, of course, it compromises action of the government that is going to come. If there is a change of government, what is the government going to do? With all these commitments, now we find and combatants whom it is your duty to keep apart, holding an even balanced hand. And the Merdeka report itself condemns it. All right? And then we have a report of ideas. I've cited the report folder. They provide recommendations on how to improve the EC, independent appointment, removal of EC members, appointment based on competitive application and hit hunting process, in particular the ability to command public confidence, powers to recruit, manage its own staff, independent from the civil service, and policy that to prevent EC members from making partisan remarks. All right, so this is the report that comes out from ideas, and we can also look at the comments that have been made by Berseh and so on, all right, that we have presented earlier on. Now, the other point, of course, is the other point is the bias in handling or ignoring complaints. We had Ahmad Fahmi's affidavit, statutory declaration. They keep saying they have no jurisdiction because they have limited powers, but I suggest that we have shown very clearly that this is not the case. They have plenary powers, they have obligations, responsibilities, and duties to reduce the fine so that he will not be disqualified. He had then written a letter to the Election Commission. Election Commission had replied to say that Election Commission had replied to say that they agreed, and they gave him confirmation that he was not disqualified, as a result of which then he entered the fray, the electoral fray. Only to find, after he had won, there is an election petition presented by the other side, which is fine, they are entitled to do that, but the Election Commission then changes its stance and supports that application, which says that this candidate should be disqualified, he has no right to stay. Now this is the problem. How does that inspire public confidence? That is the point. Now, finally, I want to talk about, and this is the final, on judicial adjudication. Now, we have seen a whole host, a raft of election petitions. And we have, in accordance with the instructions of the panel, provided a summary of the election petition and the outcome, all right, by state, the constituency and result, the petitioner, who is the petitioner, grounds for election petition, outcome and grounds why it was struck off, and the cost awarded. So now what is happening? And then it says notice of Rule 50, notice of petition, copy of petition shall be served by the petitioner. Right? So it says if it's served by the petitioner, must be served by the petitioner. If it is served by anybody else, it's wrong. Same petition, same grounds, no issue. Judges say this is mandatory. Why did the petitioner not serve it? All right? And it doesn't make sense because it says here, be served by the petitioner on the respondent personally, which shall be effected. All right? And then it says, be served by the petitioner B by sending the notice and copy of the petition. So how on earth will you establish that the petitioner, by the petitioner, be served by the petitioner by sending the notice and a copy of the petition? So how does the court know about the sending and all that? It just simply doesn't make sense to treat this. Okay, this is a rule, fine. There are rules and we have to be governed by rules. But to treat this as mandatory, that is the point. And say that because it's served by someone else, therefore, your right to a grievance arising, doesn't matter. The Barisan Nasional also filed about 21 petitions. Their petitions also were struck out. We can ignore the comment by, I don't know, one of the opposition candidates who said, no, their petitions were here only, just, immediately. 5. No, 5 election petitions. Each of the election petitions would require, if the merits are gone into, and you've got to assume that they are not going to be struck out, each of them would require many, many days, but 5 of them are fixed on the same day. What's the story? I mean, I'm very sad to say this because I practiced for 30 years, all right? But this is what is happening.
Why
The
do you
primacy,
think-
sorry?
Why do you think that is the case, that there is this unanimity among all the judges on the question of who filed the petition? Is
I
it-
don't know because if you take David Lawan's case, show me David Lawan's case. You see, there has not always been this unanimity. But by a strange coincidence, and I've been told by my yoga teachers that nothing happens by coincidence. David Lawan, Donald Lawan. Yeah, there are 12 different election judges. How is it possible? I don't know. That they can all act, they can resonate in the same way. Now this is clearly, this requires an explanation. And it has raised, I remember reading some article by one of the opposition papers. They actually accused that there must be a directive of some kind. Now, very interesting, because he had all those allegations which were quite solid with regard to Form 14. He had with regard to the fact that he was not allowed to witness. So these are very serious transgressions. And also with regard to the fact that the advanced voters, there were people who were moving it, and he witnessed it, and there was a video to that effect. So they are very serious transgressions of the election laws and the integrity of the electoral process. Now he was not, I think the lawyer was not allowed to represent him, and he was not allowed, I'm reliably informed, he was not even allowed to argue whether or not he's allowed. You know what I mean? When you, yeah, this is at page 17, but I'll just summarize the iniquity of it all. You know, normally what happens is, if you are not going to be allowed, then you can argue and say why you are allowed under this rule, read with this rule, and case law, and so on and so forth. But they said he had no locus standi. He's a lawyer, all right, an admitted advocate and solicitor of, or a good advocate who is well noted and, seasoned and experienced and everything, not just some riffraff. All right? And then when he wants to argue, he is told, no, you have no locus standi. So you cannot speak. Then you get the candidate. But they said, no, you cannot. I will briefly refer to this. Bundle 2 at page 329. Oh, yes. All right. Now, this case is also interesting because it was exactly like our indigenous people. They were offered money and then promised more money. The head village came. All kinds of bribery, which was held to be bribery in this case. All right. They were given there was clear evidence to the effect, and so on. All right. And then sorry, I think got this is on the bribery, but it is the Likas case. Apologize, it's actually bundle 3 at page 399. I hope this is the one, 399.
So I take it that in the past the courts have considered cases regardless of technicalities.
No.
So it's a new
yes.
It's a new development?
No, it is not a new development, but the consistency, the efficiency, and the sustained approach by a large number of judges is what causes concern. Last time we have petitions here and there. The Tanjung Putri, for example, there were no technical objections, all were overcome, and therefore you have the hearing. The Likas case, you had the full hearing. The case I just cited, Lawan's case, also we had a full hearing. So what suddenly, upon what meat are these people feeding that suddenly there is this incredible urge to deal with this? And we have suggested, therefore, in the context of the reforms that are going to be coming, that we hope that you will highlight, is that there must be a balance. Of course, there must be rules. But there must be a case-by-case assessment of whether or not these rules should be preemptory or directory. I cited the Privy Council decision at the time when Privy Council was binding on us at that.
Only one relation to who files the petition,
Yes.
but on other rules too? Or is that?
Yes, yes. No, I think broadly speaking, it's across the board. It's across the board. And that is why our concern. That is not being evaluated, not being assessed. There's not even a discernible trend of any kind that can be used. You know, lawyers are used to precedents and then we know what to do in the future. But what do you do in this kind of situation except? And then we had, of course, the former Chief Justice. We showed a cutting from him coming up and saying, yes, you must do that because it must act as a deterrent. And when I was a lawyer, I used to do that as well. What kind of comment is that? You know, from the highest judicial officer in the land, right? Now, so to conclude, Your Honours, you know, we are talking about the value of people's tribunals, right? They provide, we have heard a lot of comments. The Attorney General has said this is a publicity stunt. All right? It's a source of, and then that he advised, the EC said they were advised not to participate in this. It's initiated by the wider society at large, sometimes nationally, sometimes globally. And that was that kind of. The Vietnam War also, nobody was taking action. Then leakages started occurring. Daniel Ellsberg came out, so-and-so came out, and then they had a series of tribunals. Now it has a permanent house in Brussels, and they call it B, they put it small, and Brussels Foundation, you see, Brussels Foundation. All All right, it's a permanent house there of tribunals, a tribunal that deals with issues, different issues from time to time. All right? And we have, I can name so many other people's tribunal. And for the Attorney General to suggest that this is that a people's tribunal is a public stunt is a sad reflection of the kind of pronouncements to which we are subjected to and have to bear to read on an almost daily basis. So he does his own office, all right, a disservice by this public display of a complete ignorance of people's tribunals. What people's tribunals? Is it probably what he's suggesting the previous Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir, is doing it as a publicity stunt? Is this what this Attorney General is saying, telling the world? So this is the point. So the response, so we wrote to the EC and said, can you give us at least your response in writing? And we undertook, I personally undertook, on behalf of the legal team, to present this at today's hearing so that at least their version is also included. And their response is, the PT, the People's Tribunal, is not recognized under the law, right? I mean, what is that? What does that mean? PT is not recognized. This is civil society getting together to present this in as much as there's a KL War Crimes Tribunal. They say two foreigners cannot pass judgment. Right? But they had on the observer team 5 foreigners passing judgment on the process that they were undertaking. So what is this? All right? And then they said, this is a political forum to pass judgment on the government. This is serious because this shows partisanship. They say, you're going to do this against the government. But they are not part of the government. They hold no brief for the government. They are an independent body that must hold an even balance between government, non-government, and all stakeholders in the process remain above the fray. And in the process, in the context of electoral elections and democracy. And the People's Tribunal is a key component. It's a crowning glory, we would like to say. And your findings and recommendations, hopefully, will be the jewel in the crown for this crowning glory. And of course, People's Tribunal do not have the force of law. But it is people who shape history, people who can shape governments, people which are the motive force, as we have seen in the making of world history. And of course, you may fail, but as one great Chinese philosopher once said, you fail, then you try, you fail, you try, you fail, you try again until you succeed. This is the logic of the people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. We have been very impressed by your date of the tribunal. Says it is essentially a citizen's efforts and a people's platform to investigate the conduct of the last general election. Here is the important point. It will be a tribunal of conscience mandated with the moral force by the people to arrive at the truth. And indeed, that is, I think, the strong point of a tribunal like this, that it is set up by the people, it responds to the people, and it is indeed a manifestation of the sovereignty of the people. And we are accountable to the people. We have heard much evidence and analysis of the law, and though we are appointed by the Barse, we are an independent body, and we will consider carefully all the evidence that you have given us. We have no rule of technicality in this tribunal. So regardless of the way in which you have presented your views, we shall consider them all. Perhaps if they had engaged with us, there would have been, might have been, perhaps would have been a very fruitful dialogue. And it does put us in some difficulty that we have, as it were, heard from only one side. At least that is the impression they would give. And we would have felt more comfortable in embarking on a task of evaluation and recommendations if we had heard their point of view. But I'm not perhaps surprised that this has come about like this. We on our part will continue to try to imagine what they might have said if they had come in. And I also was asked by a colleague to say that, and I feel also that the critical issues that have been raised and the numerous doubts that have been placed upon the conduct of the elections will leave a... So I do have a little bit knowledge, but it seems to me that I can give you example from my own country. As you may know, in the general elections of 2007, there was a wide belief that the person who was declared by the Electoral Commission to be President Kibaki, had in fact lost the elections. As a result of, on the part of many people, that they or their community had been cheated of the prize of the presidency, and we have an executive presidency. They went on a rampage. There was a retaliation. There were about 1,500 people were killed in the course of 2 or 3 days in the most brutal way imaginable. A large number of people were expelled from their homes, land they had lived in for many, many years, to prevent them from voting for particular candidates. And to this day, those people are living in fields. The tents they were given have gone. Suggested 3 commissions should be established to examine. One was to examine the prevalence of violence, the responsibility for violence immediately after the elections. One was on Truth and Justice Commission, and the third one goes out of my mind. Also an extremely important to restoration of peace. And on each of these 3 commissions, we had at least 2 or sometimes 3 outsiders. Oh, the third one was to consider the setting up of a local tribunal for for charges against groups that this Commission on Violence might identify, rather like the tribunal in Cambodia, which would therefore would consist of a number of Kenyan judges and a number of judges from outside. The prosecutor would be a foreigner, and the chief investigator would be a foreigner. Came, and some at great inconvenience to themselves, some had to stay for quite a long time. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission went on for about 3-4 years, and they stayed the course with us. And generally, I think we felt if these people were in the commissions and in at least one case, the chair was an outsider. We felt that there would be perhaps some justice, some impartiality, and these are all distinguished people who commanded much respect. And I think that enabled us to move forward, to have confidence in these very critical processes at that time in our country. And so I felt, well, perhaps I should come and participate in this process. I also feel, and I think people go to other countries because they have a sense of solidarity, international solidarity. We are all one group. There are many international norms about how we behave, relate to each other, and I think it is emphasizing that, or acknowledgement of that international solidarity, that the role of outsiders is also important to legitimize the system of government and to bring people together. It also, on the other hand, has the potential to create deep divisions within society, as perhaps you are facing today and as we have faced many times in our country. So another dimension, therefore, of looking at the systems of elections is not only the UN international norms, important though they are, but also relating them to the circumstances of the country. And in multi-ethnic states, as you are and as we are, I think one has to develop, establish electoral systems which have a tendency to bring people together rather than to pull them apart. And we will do our best to think of ways in which reform could be brought about to take this tension away. And I have to say that since I've been here the last few days, I've become a bit worried about the increasing. On the one hand, it's wonderful to see all of you here and Berce's work, which has brought all the people, the international norms and the Kofi Annan's report and the International Parliamentary Union, and I take it that you're endorsing the norms there. But also from your general presentation, I think we can work out what kind of recommendations you would have mentioned more broadly. And we will certainly focus much of our attention on changes that we believe may be necessary to ensure truly free and fair elections. With that, I thank you all very much for your attendance and your engagement, and we hope that our report will also be a basis for a national dialogue, and that BERCE will continue its engagement with the many organizations that they have brought together. It's most impressive, and I certainly look forward to coming back at some stage, whatever others say. Thank you very much.